The Baltimore skyline bears a new void, a silent space where steel once stood. The elision of the MV DALI has culminated in a $2.25 billion settlement. Total reconstruction and economic losses are estimated to exceed $5 billion. With full federal funding, the new Francis Scott Key Bridge is projected completion in late 2030, a 7-year horizon to restore a vital artery.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our marine casualty investigator hats to forensically dissect the catastrophic collision of the MV DALI. Picture this. It's the early hours of March 26, 2024. A massive 984-foot container ship suddenly loses all power and strikes the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. It's a tragedy that claimed 6 lives, completely severed a critical economic artery, and kicked off literally the most expensive marine casualty case in history. We are going way beyond the headlines here. We're going to use verified evidence and official docs to look at the exact mechanical failures, the disputed operator modifications, and the immense legal fallout. Let's dive right in. Here's how we're going to break this down. First, the timeline. Second, the anatomy of a blackout. Third, the technical failure chain. Then, operator modifications, followed by the indictments and settlements. And finally, lessons for our maritime infrastructure. Okay, let's start with a verified minute-by-minute timeline. Now, you might think this all started at the bridge, but the crisis actually began in port the day prior, with a blackout right around 14:20 on March 25th. Fast forward about 10 hours, the ship is underway, and disaster strikes. At 1:25 a.m., the vessel suffers its first total power loss. Just 2 minutes later, at 1:27, a fatal second blackout completely cripples the ship. And then, at 1:29 and 10 seconds, this massive vessel strikes Pier 17. To put this into geographical perspective, this 984-foot vessel lost power and steering a mere 0.6 miles from the bridge. I mean, that leaves zero margin for error. Absolutely none. The pilots managed to get a rapid Mayday call-out at 1:26, which amazingly allowed police to halt bridge traffic just 48 seconds before impact, saving countless lives. But tragically, 7 road workers who were performing maintenance directly on the central span, well, they were never notified. Now, to maintain absolute objectivity as we go through this, we are categorizing all our information into 3 strict evidentiary tiers. First, verified facts. These are uncontested and backed by primary data. Second, official findings, which are the formal conclusions from the NTSB. And third, unproven allegations. These are claims that are being actively contested in court right now by the Department of Justice and the ship's operators. Moving to Section 1, Anatomy of a Blackout. Let's visualize this electrical failure. So what exactly happened during that initial underway blackout? Well, the vessel's electrical breakers unexpectedly tripped, and that immediately severed low-voltage power to the cooling water pumps. Think of it like cutting the life support to the engine. Without that cooling pressure, the massive 55,000 horsepower main engine triggers an automatic self-preserving shutdown. The crew actually managed to restore low-voltage power 58 seconds later, but honestly, the damage was already done. Propulsion was totally lost, and the steering pumps were completely paralyzed at literally the worst possible moment. Section 2, the technical failure chain. We are zooming in on the root cause. You really have to wonder, how does a vessel weighing over 100,000 tons just go completely dark? The NTSB's official findings point to a single microscopic point of failure. It's called Terminal Block 381. Deep inside the electrical control room, this tiny insulated plastic block held a critical signal wire, and that wire was responsible for keeping the high-voltage breakers closed. The failure sequence of this wire, wire 1, is a classic, tragic case of a latent mechanical defect. Basically, a thick silicone identification band had been heat-shrunk just a little too close to the wire's tip, and because of that, it prevented the wire from fully seating into the block's spring clamp gate. Now subject that precarious connection to months of relentless engine vibration, and it just slowly worked itself free. When it finally disconnected at 1:25 a.m., that severed control circuit tricked the ship's systems into tripping the breakers. And just like that, the DALI was plunged into total darkness. Of course, investigators immediately looked into the vessel's history. And they found that back in June 2023, port officials in San Antonio, Chile, had actually cited the MV DALI for propulsion and machinery deficiencies. Now, this prior citation is a verified fact, but it was resolved and ultimately unrelated to that terminal block defect. But here's the thing. Fixing a single loose wire only explains the first blackout. If we really want to understand the ship's ultimate fate, we have to figure out why it blacked out a second time. Which brings us to Section 3, Operator Modifications. We're looking at shipbuilder versus operator configurations. Official findings reveal a massive discrepancy between what the shipbuilder designed and how the operators actually ran things day to day. The ship's electrical generators absolutely required a constant supply of pressurized fuel. The original shipbuilder design used dedicated, redundant fuel pumps that were engineered to automatically restart after a power loss. But the operators had swapped that setup out. They substituted a non-redundant flushing pump. This is equipment meant for cleaning the system, not for sustained operations underway. And crucially, this flushing pump required a manual restart. Let's trace that fatal fuel flow. As the crew is desperately scrambling in the pitch black to recover from that first wire-induced blackout, that manual flushing pump just sat there, completely idle. Because it didn't automatically restart, generators 3 and 4 were rapidly starved of fuel. It's wild to think about, but this single operational modification caused the second, completely unrecoverable blackout just seconds before reaching the bridge. It sealed the vessel's fate. Section 4. Indictments and Civil Settlements. Let's look at the immense legal fallout of the collision. The state of Maryland recently secured a verified $2.25 billion civil settlement. That is the largest in maritime history. This staggering figure paid by the vessel's owners and operators covers the profound economic and infrastructure losses, and it's really notable because it entirely bypassed the owners' initial, highly controversial attempt to cap their liability at just $44 million by using an archaic 1851 maritime law. Yeah, that didn't work out for them. But the legal fallout certainly didn't stop at civil damages. The Department of Justice came in with a devastating 18-count criminal indictment. Federal prosecutors are seeking to hold the management company Shiplogy Marine and its technical superintendent criminally accountable. The DOJ's language here was incredibly severe. They cited, quote, reckless cost-cutting by dishonest foreign corporations that resulted in death. They are effectively charging the defendants with conspiracy and misconduct. Now, according to these unproven DOJ allegations, the operators engaged in a staggering pattern of deception. Prosecutors claim that the fatal substitution of that fuel flushing pump was actively concealed from regulators for years. But maybe the most shocking part? The indictment alleges the technical superintendent actually purchased forged electrical inspection certificates over the messaging app WeChat for a mere $100. And then, those forged documents were allegedly presented as authentic to NTSB investigators. Just unbelievable. Now, keeping our objective framework, we absolutely must look at the operator's defense. Shiplogy Marine strenuously denies all of these DOJ allegations. They point squarely back to the NTSB's finding of that latent manufacturer defect in the terminal block. They argue that the collision was the inevitable, tragic result of a sudden, unforeseeable electrical failure triggered by Wire 1, not some malicious cost-cutting scheme. It's going to be fascinating to watch as a federal jury trial is set for late 2027 to untangle these highly conflicting narratives. Finally, Section 5, Lessons for Maritime Infrastructure. How do we prevent the next disaster? Official findings highlight some really severe systemic failures, both on the vessel itself and within the port infrastructure. On the ship, high-voltage breakers were left in manual mode, which severely delayed the recovery. Even worse, the emergency generator took 70 seconds to connect. That completely fails the mandated 45-second maritime safety standard. And off the ship? Well, the 1970s-era bridge piers totally lacked modern dolphins. Those are the protective physical barriers capable of deflecting a 100,000-ton vessel. So to prevent this from ever happening again, the NTSB is now heavily recommending routine infrared thermal imaging to detect overheating, vibrating connections way before they actually fail. As maritime trade demands ships the size of literal skyscrapers, we are somehow still routing them through infrastructure designed for a completely bygone era. It forces us to ask, is modern port infrastructure truly prepared for the complex vessels of tomorrow? The tragedy of the MV DALI proves that the safety of global shipping requires absolutely flawless mechanical redundancy, relentless maintenance, and bridges that can survive the absolute worst-case scenarios. It leaves us with a chilling question to ponder. How many other vessels are currently navigating our waters, harboring their own microscopic points of failure? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.